A chain snapped tight around a starving throat. The animal on the end of it lurched sideways, hit the frozen mud, and lay there heaving. 3 men laughed. One raised a wooden club and tested its weight in his palm. Another spat into the snow near the beast's muzzle. Nobody moved to stop them. That kind of thing did not happen in a place like this on a day like this. Then a small woman in a patched gray cloak pushed through the ring of bodies. She was thin. She was shaking. She was holding out a pouch that clinked with the last coin she owned. Her name was Elowen Vance. What she did not know was that the beast at her feet was the most feared king in the north. And what would 12 armed hunters do when they kicked her door in? Stay with me on this one. The men at the pit looked her up and down. The tall one, the one with the club, tipped his head back and laughed at the sky. He asked what a mouse like her wanted with a dying wolf. Elowen did not answer him. She counted the coins out into his glove one by one until the pouch was empty. 6 copper, 2 silver. That was every coin she had earned copying merchant ledgers through the long dark half of the year. The man looked at the money. He looked at the wolf. He looked at his friends. Then he shrugged and unhooked the chain from the post. He told her the beast was hers. He told her he would not carry it home for her. And he told her that if she was smart, she would slit its throat before the sun went down, because a wolf with hunger in its eyes remembered every hand that had ever fed it, and not with gratitude. Elowen took the chain. She did not know how she was going to walk this dying animal across the market square, past the tanner's row, and up the frozen lane to her cottage. But she did. She whispered to him the whole way. She told him her name. She told him she was sorry for the men. She told him that her fire was small, but it was warm, and that her broth was thin, but it was hot, and that she had never in her whole life hurt a living thing on purpose. The wolf walked because she walked. He fell twice. Both times she knelt in the snow and stayed with him until he found his legs again. The cottage sat at the top of a lane where nothing else was built. It had 1 room. It had 1 window. It had a hearth that took more wood than she could afford. When she pushed the door open with her shoulder, the wolf simply followed her inside as if the choice had already been made for him, and he lay down on the flagstones by the fire like a dog that had lived there his whole life. She looked at him then. Really looked. He was enormous. Even starved and shaking, he was longer than her arm span from nose to tail, and his chest, under the loose skin, was still the chest of an animal that had once been very strong. His fur was black. His eyes were closed. The old iron collar had left a raw ring around his throat that wept in the warmth of the room. She heated water. She washed the wound with a clean rag. She did not know why he let her. She only knew that when she cupped a bowl of broth under his muzzle, he drank, and when she laid her hand on the flat of his skull, he did not move away. She named him Caelan because it was the name her mother used to say in the old bedtime stories, the name of a lord who lived alone in a tower and had no one to speak to but the wind. It seemed like a name for an animal who had been chained. The first week, he could not stand for more than the length of a breath. She fed him from her own bowl, spoon by spoon, until her own belly ached and she chewed on dried peel to trick it. The second week, he began to eat on his own and to follow her with his eyes as she moved around the room. The third week, he stood up when she came in from the well, and he laid his heavy head against her hip, and she cried into his ruff for reasons she could not have explained if anyone had asked her. She slept curled against his ribs those 3 weeks, not because it was proper. Because the cottage was cold, and he was warm in a way no fire had ever been, and because when her cheek pressed into his fur, she dreamt of forests she had never walked in. She dreamt of a man on a black horse. She dreamt of a crown made of antler. She dreamt of a voice that said her name as if her name were something rare. She did not know what any of it meant. She only knew that she was not lonely anymore. And in the town below her lane, in the tavern by the river, 3 riders in gray cloaks sat down at a table and began to ask very quietly about a small Omega scribe who had bought a wolf. The riders drank little. They tipped well. They asked about weather, about the market, about which farms had lost sheep to wolves the previous month. But every question, somehow, worked its way back to the same small subject. Who was the woman who bought the black wolf from the pit? Where did she live? Did she live alone? Was the animal still alive? The tavern keeper was not a stupid man. He answered the surface of every question and left the depth of every answer for himself. But others in the room were less careful. A wagoner said the cottage was up the lane above the tanner's row. A butcher's boy said the scribe had not been down for market bread in 7 days. A drunk in the corner said she had walked the wolf through the square as gentle as if it were a lamb, and that any woman who could do that was either a saint or a witch, and he did not much care to find out which. The riders paid their bill. They rode out through the eastern gate. They did not come back, but 3 others on darker horses arrived the next dawn. Eloin felt the shift in the town before she understood it. She went to the well, and the women there stopped talking when she came near. The baker who used to give her the day's last loaf for 1 copper suddenly wanted 3. The candle maker asked her, very carefully, whether her wolf ate a great deal, and whether the wolf knew her by name, and whether the wolf slept indoors or out. She answered these questions as truthfully as she answered anything, because it did not occur to her to lie, and she carried her small purchases home in the cold with a feeling in the back of her neck she had never felt before in her life. Kaelin was standing at the door when she came up the lane, standing on his own. He had not stood at the door before. His golden eyes found her the moment she cleared the last rise, and something in his stance said that he had been waiting. She went to him and pressed her forehead to the flat plane between his eyes, the way she had begun to do, and she whispered that something in the town was wrong, and that she did not know what it was, and that she was going to bar the door tonight and keep the fire low and hope that whatever it was would pass her by. He made a sound in the back of his throat then. It was not a growl. It was closer to a word. She stepped back from him, she looked at him. She said his name out loud, quietly in the empty cottage, and for 1 long second she was not sure that the eyes looking back at her were the eyes of an animal. Then he lay down at the hearth again, and he was only a wolf, and she told herself she was tired and hungry and imagining things. That night she did what she said she would do. She barred the door. She banked the fire. She sat with her back against Kaelin's warm flank and copied out 3 pages of a landowner's inventory by the light of 1 thin candle, and when her hand cramped she put down the quill and she closed her eyes and she listened. The lane was silent. The wind was still. Somewhere far below in the town a dog was barking, and then another dog answered it, and then a third, and then all the dogs in Ravensmoor were barking at once, in the strange rolling way that dogs bark when something is moving through a place that should not be there. Kaelin's head lifted from his paws. The barking stopped as suddenly as it had started. It was replaced by a silence so complete that Eloin could hear the small tick of the wax as her candle burned down. She stood up. She went to the small window. She scraped a circle of frost from the pane with her thumbnail and looked out at the lane. Nothing. Snow. Moonlight on snow. The black shapes of the pines at the edge of the lane. Nothing moving. Nothing at all. She let out a long breath she had not known she was holding. She turned back to the room. Kaelin was watching her from the hearth. His eyes in the firelight were the softest thing she had ever seen. He thumped his tail once against the flagstones, slow and heavy like a promise. She almost laughed at herself. She laughed at the barking dogs, at the tavern gossip, at the tightness in her chest that had made her jump at nothing. She went back to the hearth. She lowered herself down beside him. She picked up her bowl of cold broth from the stone, and she took a small, careful sip of it, and she felt the warmth of his ribs against her back, and she thought, for the first time in a long time, that she was safe, that the strangeness was over, that whoever the riders had been, they had gone somewhere else to bother someone else, and that her small, quiet life would be allowed to go on. She rested her head against his shoulder. She closed her eyes. The door came off its hinges in one blow. It did not open. It did not shudder. It came off. The bar snapped. The frame splintered. And the cold of the night poured into the cottage in one great white breath, along with the shapes of men. Elowen was on her feet before she knew she had moved. Kaelin was already between her and the doorway, and the sound coming out of him now was not any kind of word. It was the sound a mountain makes when it decides to fall. There were 4 of them in the doorway and more behind. She counted without meaning too. Cloaks, hoods, crossbows already raised. One of them held a lantern high and swung the beam across the room until it caught her face, and then it caught the wolf, and then it stopped moving. The one with the lantern said a name. He did not say Kaelin. He said another name. He said Dreven. And the whole room, the wolf, the men in the doorway, the small Omega scribe pressed against the hearthstone with a bowl of broth still in her hand, went absolutely still. The lantern man stepped inside. He was a heavy man. Silver braid on his collar, silver at his wrists. A silver bolt already fitted into the groove of his crossbow, because silver is what you use when you are hunting the thing they were hunting. He said Kaelin's other name again. He said it slow. He said it like a man reading a death sentence off a piece of paper. He said that they had chased the trail of a ghost through 3 counties, and that they had almost given up, and that they never would have found him at all if a drunk in a tavern had not talked about a saint, or a witch who walked a black wolf through a market square as gentle as a lamb. Then he looked at Elowen, and he told her very politely to step away from the animal, because what was about to happen was not the sort of thing a woman should have to see. She did not step away. She did not think about it. She did not weigh it. Her body simply did not move, and her hand came up and rested on the crest of Kaelin's shoulder. And the small, stupid thought in her head was that she had promised him her fire was warm and her broth was hot, and that she had never in her whole life hurt a living thing on purpose, and that she was not going to let a man in a silver collar make a liar out of her tonight. The lantern man's face changed. Something cold happened behind his eyes. He gave a small nod to the man beside him, and the crossbow came up, and Elowen understood in a single flat instant that the bolt was not for the wolf. The bolt was for her. Because a woman who had touched the beast, who had fed the beast, who had slept beside the beast for 3 weeks, was not a witness they could leave alive. That was the change. Not pride, not the wolf, not a hunt anymore. It was cleanup. The crossbow snapped. She did not see Kaelin move. Nobody in the room saw Kaelin move. There was a wolf at the hearth, and then there was a wolf in midair, and then there was a wolf standing on the chest of the crossbowman with his teeth at the man's throat, and the bolt buried in the wall behind where she had been standing a heartbeat before. He did not kill him. He held him. He looked over his shoulder past his own bared teeth, and his golden eyes found Elowen against the hearth, and she saw for the second time that these were not the eyes of an animal. They were the eyes of a mind that had made a choice and was waiting to be told whether the choice would be honored. She said one word. She said his name. And the wolf turned his head back to the crossbowman, and he did not tear his throat out. He broke his arm. One clean snap. The bow spun across the floor. If you are still with me at this point in the story, do me one small favor and hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing and it means more than you know. Now here is where it turns. The 11 other men came alive at once. Blades came out. A second bolt was fitted. Someone shouted an order, and Elowen realized with a small clean click somewhere behind her eyes that even a giant wolf could not fight 11 armed men in one small room, and that she had 30 seconds, maybe less, to do something that made sense. She grabbed the iron poker from the hearth. She stepped in front of Kaelin. She raised the poker in both her thin arms, and she said, loud enough that the whole doorway heard her, that they would have to kill her first. The lantern man laughed. It was not a kind laugh. He told her that was very moving. He told her he was going to grant her wish. He raised his own crossbow and he aimed it not at her head but at her heart, because a shot to the heart is faster, and he was not a cruel man about that at least. He did not get to fire, because somewhere outside the cottage in the black pines above the lane, a howl went up that was not the howl of any wolf in that room. It was long. It was low. It was answered a heartbeat later by a second howl from the south, and then a third from the west, and then a fourth. And then Eloin could not count them anymore, because the whole night around the cottage had become one long throat of sound, and the men in her doorway had gone the color of old milk. The lantern man lowered his crossbow. He said one word very quietly. He said blood moon. Kaelin shifted. There is no other word for what happened. The wolf at Eloin's back did not stand up and become a man. He unfolded. He came apart at the joints and put himself back together with a sound like ice breaking on a deep river. And where the wolf had been, there was now a man on one knee in front of her hearth, naked, breathing hard, his black hair falling to his shoulders, his skin a map of old silver scars, and his eyes still the same golden eyes that had been watching her from the flagstones for 3 long weeks. She did not scream. She should have. She did not. She simply stood there with her small iron poker still raised in her hands and her mouth open, and she watched the man she had been feeding broth to for 21 nights stand slowly to his full height. He was tall. He was taller than any man in the doorway. He was taller than the lantern man by half a head, and the sound that came out of him when he turned to face the hunters was not a human sound, and it was not a wolf's sound either. It was something older than both. The lantern man dropped the lantern. The lantern went out. The only light in the cottage was the low red glow of the hearth behind Eloin, and it painted the naked king in a color like fresh blood. He said the lantern man's name. It was Verk. He said it as if he had been waiting a long time to say it. He said that Verk had put a silver bolt in his shoulder at the ford of the Grey River in autumn, and had left him for dead in a snowbank, and that Verk had gone home to a warm hall and told his master that the Blood Moon King was in the ground, and that Verk was going to regret every one of those choices in the next 30 seconds. Verk reached for his sword. He did not clear the scabbard. Kaelin crossed the room in a stride and took Verk by the throat with one hand and lifted him off the flagstones as easily as a man lifts a puppy by the scruff, and the 10 other hunters in the room simply stood and stared, because none of them, not one of them, had ever seen the Blood Moon King on his feet. They had heard the stories. Every wolf in the north had heard the stories. But hearing is one thing. Kaelin turned his head toward them. His golden eyes swept the room. And every wolf in that doorway, every armed hunter, every hooded man with a silver blade on his belt, went down onto one knee at the same time. They did not choose to kneel. Their bodies chose for them. It was the oldest law any of them knew, and it does not ask permission. When the true king of your blood stands in front of you and shows you his eyes, you kneel. You kneel or you die on your feet with your legs broken under you. Eloin watched them go down. She did not understand yet, not all of it, but she understood enough to feel her knees go soft under her. Kaelin dropped Verk. Verk hit the flagstones on his knees like the rest of them, and the naked king turned slowly and he looked at Eloin. His eyes changed. The gold did not leave them. The wolf did not leave them, but something else came into them, something soft and tired and almost afraid, and he crossed the room to her in 3 long steps, and he sank down onto one knee in front of her, this time on purpose, this time as a man. He took her hand. Her small hand with the ink stains on the first 2 fingers. He turned it over and pressed his forehead to her palm the way she had pressed her forehead to his brow every night for 3 weeks, and she felt his shoulders shake once, just once, and then he was steady again. He said her name. He said Aloin. And the way he said it was the way the voice in her dreams had said it, the voice she had heard through his ribs while she slept. He said he was sorry he had not been able to warn her. He said he had not been able to shift back until his body had food in it and his blood had rest, and that she had given him both without asking him for a single thing in return. He said that in 3 weeks in her cottage she had done what his own pack could not do in a season of hunting, which was bring him back from the dead. He said one more thing then. He said that the bond had already chosen, that the moment she had knelt in the snow with him on the market lane and told him her broth was thin but hot, something in him had reached for something in her, and that whatever she wanted to do with that now, whatever she wanted to say, whatever she wanted to refuse, he would honor. But that his wolves knew, and that they would kneel to her the same way they knelt to him, because his blood had already claimed her as their queen. Aloin looked past his shoulder at the 11 men on their knees on her cold flagstones. She looked at Verk, white with pain, holding his broken arm. She looked at the black doorway where her door used to be. She looked at the empty bowl of broth on the hearth. And then she looked back down at the naked king with his forehead against her palm. She said one word. She said yes. The wolves in the trees came in an hour later. There were more of them than Aloin could count. Gray ones, brown ones, 2 great white ones that walked at the front like officers. They came up the lane in silence, on soft paws in soft snow, and they stopped at the broken door and waited to be told what to do. Kaelin was dressed by then. One of the hunters had given him a cloak. Nobody had needed to be asked. Every one of the 11 men on the flagstones had waited for a small nod from their new king before they moved, and Kaelin had given the nod. And now the cottage was warmer and quieter than it had ever been in Aloin's life, and she was sitting on the hearth with a woolen blanket around her shoulders and a fresh bowl of hot broth in her hands, and she was trying, very slowly, to understand what her life had become in one night. The 2 white wolves came into the cottage first. They walked past the kneeling hunters as if the hunters were furniture. They stopped in front of Aloin, and they lay down flat on the stones at her feet with their muzzles on their forepaws, and they closed their eyes and they waited. Kaelin knelt beside her. He told her their names. He told her they were the eldest wolves of his pack, and that they had traveled every step of the last 3 months searching for him, and that they were not lying down at her feet because he had told them to. They were lying down because they knew. She reached out one small ink-stained hand and she laid it on the head of the nearest one, and the great wolf sighed out a breath that had been held for a season. Verk was taken outside. He was not killed. Kaelin told her quietly that a king who begins his reign with an execution begins his reign badly, and that Verk and the 10 others would be given the choice every traitor in the north was given, which was to bend the knee to the true blood or to walk into the pines and never come back. He said most of them would kneel. He said 1 or 2 would not, and that the ones who did not would be given horses and half a day's head start, and that after that they were on their own, and the wolves of his pack were very patient hunters. She asked him then, in a very small voice, how any of it was going to work. She asked him how a scribe from a lane above the tanner's row was supposed to be a queen of anything. She asked him whether he was sure, whether the bond that had chosen her had chosen right, whether he would not, in the cold light of some morning that had not happened yet, look at her and see only the mouse the men at the pit had laughed at. Kaelin took her chin in his hand, very gently. He turned her face up to his and he waited until she met his eyes. He told her that a queen was not made by the clothes she wore or the hall she sat in. He told her that a queen was a person who stood between the strong and the weak and did not move. And he told her that she had already done that she had done it in the market square with a pouch of copper and 2 silver, that she had done it again on the flagstones of her own cottage tonight with an iron poker in both hands. He told her that the pack had not chosen a scribe. The pack had chosen a woman who could not be moved. She did not cry. She had done her crying earlier in the week, into the ruff of a wolf who had turned out to be a king. She only nodded once, small and slow, and she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his the way she had done every night for 21 nights. Outside, the pines began to light. The long dark half of the year was almost over. Somewhere down in the town, a rooster crowed as if the world were still an ordinary place. They stayed in the cottage another 3 days. Kaelin would not let her leave until she was ready. The pack camped in the pines above the lane and hunted what the winter would give them, and every evening the 2 old white wolves came in to lie at her feet, and every evening she copied a few more pages of the landowner's inventory, because she had promised the work would be done by the turning of the moon, and she was a woman who kept her word. On the 4th morning, they walked down the lane together. She wore her old gray cloak. She would not let anyone give her a new one yet. Kaelin walked at her right hand, and the 2 white wolves walked at her left, and the 11 men who had kicked her door in walked behind them, unarmed, on foot, because their king had told them they had a long way still to walk before they had earned back their horses. At the pit in the market square, the tall man with the club was standing there, drinking hot wine and telling somebody a story. He looked up. He saw her. He saw the naked truth of the pack behind her, and the cup of hot wine slipped out of his glove and hit the frozen mud, and a low advance walked past him without a single word, and she did not look at him twice. She had a broth to make. She had a king to feed, and she was not lonely anymore.